IVM.
Hello and welcome to yet another episode of Simplified, the smartest podcast to come out of Malad West, and one that is guaranteed to make you sound a lot smarter than you actually are. And today, for a change, we have someone who's actually smarter than the two of us. Tony, would you like to introduce our guest?
Oh, okay. I thought you were saying I'm the smarter one amongst the three of us. So that was Naren. This is Tony. And our special guest today, because we couldn't do enough research for this topic, is the very popular on Twitter and COO of the Ken, Praveen Gopalkrishnan, who goes by PGK. Say hi, PGK, before we embarrass you a little more.
Hello, Tony. Hello, Naren. Let me just say that appearing on Simblified has been like a dream of mine over the last couple of years. I have dropped several hints, some starting with very subtle ones. Later, it became not so subtle, asking, will you have me as a guest? I am free to come to Malad. Tony, reply to my email. Okay, yes. But finally, it worked. And I'm really, really glad to be here.
Yeah, I mean, it's not for nothing. I'm getting 2 years free Ken subscription, right? So I was just saying this is actually a very special episode because it's the 199th. So we were saving you for that. And like the cultural angle I bring to this is some knowledge of the Bible. So if you're familiar with the miracle at Cana, it's basically where Jesus turned water into wine. And promptly, lots of Malayalis became Christians overnight. But so the takeaway there is basically the Jesus turns water to wine after all the guests are drunk, and this guy comes and says, what have you done? You normally serve the good alcohol at the beginning, and then you serve the cheap one. You've done it the other way around. So that's what we've done with episode 199. PGK, who's holding a bottle of wine, which he claims contains water, is here. And he's not just the CEO of the Ken. He runs the most popular weekly newsletter that exists now that Chuck and I have shut down the third slip. It's called The Nut Graph. And it's been extremely perceptive and probably one of the only things that I read every week. So we are indeed fortunate to have the one and only PGK. After this intro, I think we've put enough pressure on you to sort of take it away.
This is really, really nice, guys. Thank you so much.
And also the Ken has a new podcast, right? Which is Unofficial Sources,
yes.
Which I think Praveen has been instrumental in setting up.
Yes.
And the only difference between the Nut Graph, official sources and here is that it's still irreverent. It's still funny. We like to do our fact check. But we can make jokes about IIM Calcutta without being threatened by our audience.
I will not offer any comments about institutes of repute. But yes, we do have a podcast. It's called Unofficial Sources. I play a very small part in it. It's mostly held by this wonderful, wonderful person who joined the Ken. Her name is Anushka. She started off as an intern and she actually wrote back to us after she finished her intern. She finished her college saying, hey, I think I would like to do a podcast with you. And we're like, that's actually not a bad idea. So she came in and she's been doing a lot of the heavy work. So yes, it's early days. We're very excited. Our goal is to become the second most popular podcast in India because as everyone knows, you cannot beat Amit Verma's The Seen and the Unseen.
Yeah. And more importantly, I think for people who are not familiar, this is a free podcast, right? Unofficial Sources.
That's right.
You don't need
it is a free podcast for now. It comes with a bit of a threat. No, it's not a threat. I mean, it's going to be free for a while at least.
All right, great. So what we wanted to talk about today and bring in PGK for is something that we don't really understand too well. And it's
There's a
one
very
of the rare
small
occasions where
list we are talking about, just a few million items.
Yeah. So there's that joke, there are two books. One is everything that they teach you at Harvard Business School, and the other one is called everything that they don't teach you at the Harvard Business School. And between those two books, the sum total of the universe is there. But anyway, so this is one of the rare occasions where we have PGK, and one of the rare occasions where PGK is actually in support of Facebook, which is like, dang. We need to play some ominous music here. So I think it's called the Media Bargaining Code, and Australia known for doing weird things like, inviting people over to the GABA has done some strange things here. PGK, can you simplify this whole thing for us?
Yes, Tony, before I begin, let me just put out this idea out there that you and I can do a cricket podcast, just you and I. We can really kill it. Okay. All right. But back to Australia. Okay, here is a very, very simple summary of what happened. I'm going to start off with this thing that I call the hook, which is that something really interesting happened. Around 2 to 3 weeks back, if you were in Australia and you opened up Facebook and you basically said, oh, this is a news of something that I really liked and really enjoyed, and let me share it with my friends. And you put it on Facebook, any news article, let me stress, not just news article that is in Australia, not just Australian publications. If you're in Australia, you could take an article from the New York Times or even the Ken and put it out there. And if you hit share, you will see this pop-up that comes, and this pop-up reads. And I'm going to read out this pop-up because it's a very interesting pop-up. It says, headline, this post can't be shared. I'll leave you to consider that. This is on Facebook, by the way. Can't be shared. I've never heard of anything that can't be shared on Facebook. And below that it says, in response to Australian government legislation, Facebook restricts the posting of news links and all posts from news pages in Australia. Globally, the posting and sharing of news links from Australian publications is restricted. That's it.
Wow.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So what actually happened was Australia decided to go forward with this legislation that, Tony, that you correctly call. It's called the Media Bargaining Code. The Media Bargaining Code is a very strange legislation. I think globally we're used to, and a lot of tech companies are also used to all kinds of legislation. Like there are people who are out there trying to break up tech companies, saying that you've become too big and too powerful. There is antitrust that says that, okay, not only are you too big and too powerful and we'll break you up, but you have a monopoly in some areas and we have to figure out ways to get rid of this. We will put fines on you, or we have to moderate the content that you have. So things like that. These are all things that people are familiar with. All of these tech companies understand at some level that this is going to happen. The Media Bargaining Code is none of that. The Media Bargaining Code is just one country that says, listen, you are Google and you are Facebook. All of these articles that are being shared on your platform, whenever you share it or whenever any user shares it and clicks on that link, or whenever that link is shared, you have to pay this newspaper something, because what you're doing is you are using the newspaper's content on your platform. And how can you do that? That is the Media Bargaining Code.
Okay. That's very strange, right? Because like all of the content on Facebook anyway is owned and created by someone else, and Facebook definitely doesn't want to do anything with it.
Yes.
Very clearly, because they don't want to even bring in content moderation and stuff like that.
True.
So like, what's the genesis of this? Like, why would this law even come about? It just sounds very bizarre.
Yes. And this law is really bizarre because you're right, Tony, that one part is exactly that, which is that, well, Facebook says this is all user-generated content, etc. So there is always been some tension between Australia, the country, and its news publishers, and Facebook, the company. So there's a story. It's a little apocryphal in the sense that, well, speaking as someone who works in a media organization, it was reported and through sources, etc. And then later, basically, I think it was sort of an off-the-record conversation where somebody sort of like slyly put a news article, but here's the story. So the story is that around a few years back, Facebook basically looked at this entire thing that was going on with them and said, okay, it looks like the tide is turning against us, news organizations are turning against us, etc. So let's try to do something proactive about it, because anyway, the media industry is sort of dying. And sometimes they look at us and say, look, you are the cause for this. So let us try some way to help them out. So what they did was they hired this lady. Her name is Campbell Brown. So if you don't know Campbell Brown was one of the top news anchors in the US. I think she was with NBC, but I might be wrong. She may be on one or two channels. And Campbell Brown came onto Facebook as their, I don't know the exact designation, but I suspect it was something to do with news partnerships or something like that. And Campbell Brown flew to Australia and she met the heads of all the publishers of major newspapers in Australia. And it was a meeting that was supposed to be off the record. And in that meeting, it was a very contentious conversation where obviously the news publishers were telling Facebook that, look, we're losing a lot of our revenue because of you. Thanks to you, people don't even visit our website. And you have taken away all our ad dollars, etc., etc. And somewhere in this contentious conversation, Campbell Brown is allegedly, reportedly supposed to have said that all of you, at least the newspaper industry in Australia, are all dying and you're all going to die. And if you basically want to work with us as Facebook, it'll be nice. Otherwise, I will hold your hand in the hospice as you lay there on your deathbed. which of course got reported because considering that all of this happened. But it is begun from there. This happened like, I think 2 to 3 years back. And I think media in Australia essentially said, okay, let's see if we can do something about this. It's very unusual in countries for media companies to completely band together. Now, that is possible in Australia simply because Australia is home to the greatest media magnate in the world. And his name is Rupert Murdoch. And Rupert Murdoch's News Corp, which is right now a global empire, started off in Australia. And he has very strong, powerful connections, deep-rooted connections inside Australia. So led by News Corp, a lot of these news publishers lobbied successfully. And I have not seen media lobby successfully for anything in any government anywhere in the world. But apparently it happens in Australia. Now, the news in media in Australia is also...
The government lobbying the media on the other hand.
That is commonplace. That we all know happens all the time.
Correct.
Or the government treating the media as something that is like to be discarded and thrown on the side. That also happens all the time. In countries that we will not name, but who knows which country. But what actually happened over here was that the reason why these media organizations were able to exercise a lot of control, and I read this article in The Guardian where I said, okay, where does this power come from? Sure, you may have Rupert Murdoch, sure, you may have News Corp, but what gives you so much power to lobby an entire government? And it turns out that The Guardian did like a 4-part series on this a couple of years back, where it says that in Australia, the news media has a disproportionate amount of power. And I think the article essentially said that the news media, specifically Mr. Murdoch and News Corp, etc., were very powerful and instrumental in getting rid or influencing the positions of at least 2 to 3 prime ministers of Australia, where you can basically decide, okay, this particular person, let's start running our stories which may be like against them, etc., and the person is out. So legislators know this. They know that you do not want to cross these people. So I suspect that may have played a part. So I think then they came up with this legislation which was completely backwards. And the first reaction...
Just hold on. One question is, how much of this is factual? Like the traffic to news sites have reduced because of Facebook. I would assume it's the opposite, right? Now you've got way more backlinks to your website as opposed to not having them at all.
Yes. In fact, I don't think it is about traffic at all. I think it's just about revenue. I think they're basically trying to say that because you're losing advertisers and all the advertisers you seem to have, so obviously it's all your fault, even though you're sending traffic away. In fact, what you're saying, Tony, is exactly what Facebook's argument is. Facebook's argument is, listen, this is completely backwards. Let me show you the amount of traffic we have sent to your dying newspapers and websites, and we have not charged you for it. This is stuff that we sent it to you for free. In fact, the first press release I think Facebook had, they basically sort of passive-aggressively said, listen, we are the magnanimous ones here. We are the ones who are not taking money from you. And now you want money from us. There is some Russian meme over here where you say like in Soviet Russia, okay, there is something here. But that's the story.
Very interesting.
One can see it from the media point of view, right? So what actually pays for reporting is expensive, right? And
absolutely,
what really pays for it is ad revenue. And if you take that away, your only alternative is to charge the customer a subscription fee, which hasn't really worked anywhere in the world.
Correct.
And if the media, if it folds up, there's not going to be any reporting anymore. Right?
True. Yeah, I mean, I could go for an hour just on that statement, by the way. Okay, discussing that. But Tony, please.
No, I was just saying like there are 2 case studies, right? One global, which is how the New York Times actually switched to a subscription model. And right here in our little Zoom window, Praveen Gopalkrishnan very successfully running the Ken. Because when the Ken started out in India, I was like one of the naysayers saying, who was going to pay for news and stuff like that. But the fact that these guys have pivoted and, basically there are multiple things, right? One is that if you're paying for news or insights, then you automatically produce good journalism in that respect, right? Not just verbatim parroting whatever is happening across the board. The other thing is that as news organizations or media gets bigger, it's impossible for them to remain independent as well. So if you are going to rely on advertising, like there's that hazard also. But on the other hand, when advertising was relevant to digital media was when it was directly translated from offline media, right? I'm paying you for column inches, which is drastically changed now because targeting and stuff like that is going to lie in the hands of whoever has the most amount of data or whoever is given data by you. And that is obviously going to be the Facebook and Googles of the world, right? So I think that model was anyway about to die and it was just been accelerated.
Yeah. So there are like 3 broad nuances to this. I'm just going to describe all three very quickly. So first, Naren, you're completely correct, which is that it's true that publishers and news publishers over time, because they were completely print-based, you had like a local power that you had. So the only way anyone who was an advertiser could access a local population was through newspapers. So fundamentally, it was a very symbiotic relationship. I write for my readers, and as an advertiser, you come and you access that. Now, the internet changed all of that. Now, what the internet did was there is a great article by Ben Thompson of Strategy where he talks about publishing and how the internet changed it. And what it did was it made basically supply infinite, which meant that you could go to like 1 million websites across anywhere in the world and read it. So you don't have to be in New York to read New York Times. New York Times is now for the world. The converse of that is if you're a small publisher, say in Dallas, then why would you want to go to the Dallas newspaper and put an ad over there when I can just find out what people in Dallas are doing on the internet and just show those ads over there? So that's the first thing that ends up happening. The second thing is, in general, whenever this shift has happened in the internet, the people who have always won are, in terms of the advertising thing, are almost always the platforms. Google has emerged, Facebook has emerged, and I say this as someone who has done ad tech for 5 years and tried to build ad tech products. I think ad tech.
But what is this feeling of pride on your face?
There's this great saying which basically says that the smartest people in the world are just trying to figure out people to click on ads, and I was one of those smartest people. So I just said, "Hey, that was me." Okay. No, but then what ends up happening is it's actually a great business for a platform player. It's great for some kinds of publishers. So if you're like a gaming publisher, if you're like a mass publisher, it's possible. News, I'm not entirely sure. It doesn't look like it's possible. For a long time, they said that BuzzFeed would be the next big thing. It didn't really work. So that's the first nuance. The second nuance is that, yes, one way to think about it is that the news publishers hate and blame Facebook for it, but only after they used Facebook for several years in order to further their goals. So, for instance, there was this very famous thing around 4 years back where everybody would ask everyone in every board meeting, in every strategy meeting, which is, what is your Facebook video strategy? And that is just this time where Facebook had taken over everybody's lives and everybody looked like you needed to have a Facebook video strategy. That pivot to video became this big thing. And a lot of people did that. But Facebook is the one that after like years when they started living off Facebook decided to turn off the tap. And the reason why Facebook turned off the tap was exactly after the 2016 election. So once the 2016 election happened, everybody turned on Facebook and said, this is all your fault. And then Facebook said, okay, so I guess I will have to do less of this. And they did less of this. Then they're like, hey, this is also your fault. And they're like, okay, but what do you want me to do? So that was the second nuance.
Yeah. So there's this point where basically Facebook, when it started out, its sort of credo was move fast and break things. Mm-hmm. And I think post 2016, suddenly it turned into break fast and move things. Like you have to wake up every day to a new problem and move things around.
Yeah, but all of these things sort of combined, and that's the reason why now they have decided, okay, it's time to try to get some money out of them. And if we can't do it, and we can't ban them because that's going to be counterproductive. We can't force them to change their algorithms because that would be more complicated. What if we ask them to pay us? Okay, I think that's the thinking broadly.
Yeah. And Australia is the only one to have come up with this, or is it like...
there's a variant of this that's happening in Europe with Google. And that is a little more nuanced though, to be fair. And that is about specifically with Google News, where basically a lot of people are putting pressure on Google to say, look, if you're using Google News as a platform, and you're getting people that perhaps you should start paying news publishers. Slightly more nuanced. And I think it's not exactly like to like, but it's a cousin, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. And even in Australia, Google, I think, had a different approach to this whole thing,
yes, right? Yes. So what ended up happening was once they started doing this code, of course, everybody decided to play hardball at first. Like Facebook was the one who threatened several times, listen, we will stop this, we'll stop. Nobody believed they could do it. And finally they did. And then everyone was shocked when they did it. Google, on the other hand, did this thing where they actually went and signed a deal. They went and signed a deal with, I think, 2 or 3 of the biggest publishers in Australia. And it was basically this deal that paid some lump sum money over several years in order to do this. And obviously, one interpretation of it is that there was an extortion attempt, and obviously Google decided that, you know what, maybe we are better off paying a ransom to secure our future. That's one interpretation. I'm not saying that's my interpretation. I'm saying that's one interpretation. But there is also this great nuance on why Google did this. And the reason why Google did this also, if you think about it, is not completely based on principles. It's also based on product. Because this thing where, you cannot share links on Facebook is something that Facebook can do. Google can't do that because as far as Google is concerned, that search bar is everything. If you go there and you search for something, the best results have to show up. It doesn't make sense from Google's perspective to say that if the best result is a news site, I'm just going to black out all the news site. And that is going to reduce the utility of my product overall. They can't afford to do that. And it's a little more complicated because it's not just about sharing news links about what is the news now, is this news? So it's not that simple. So I think Google actually had little choice considering the way their product was.
I also think that Google probably has some experience in monetizing clicks. They do that for YouTube. So the more people click on your video, the more money you get. Maybe they can think of something like that for news articles as well. So
yeah, they do that. In fact,
that'll be a win-win.
But they do that even today. So let's say, for instance, if you click on, say, a Google ad for something, and so basically, of course, Google takes some part of the money, but some part of the money obviously goes to like okay, in this case, you're right, Naren. It's the Google is the publisher itself. But let's say, for instance, there are Google ads that show up. It's called AdSense. Let's say you had like a website and you have these you'll see this Google ads that show up in the corner with AdSense, and if someone clicks on it, the publisher gets money. I remember in the early 2000s or the mid 2000s, maybe Tony remembers this, where a lot of people got into blogging. I don't know why I said Tony remembers this. Naren is older. Okay. So anyway,
Naren had a brilliant blog.
That's true, actually. Yes.
Yeah.
Naren
Autobiography and Ordinary Man. Yeah.
That's true. Both of you will remember this. That there was this time where, I don't know if you know this, where people were basically, I'm sure you know this, where people were basically saying, start a blog, get some clicks. And after some time, suddenly a check will appear in your mail sent by Google, and it will be for the grand sum of $9. And I think somebody said that they got a check after some 4 years or something. And it was some small amount. And they were like, okay, this is the money I'm making after all of this.
Yeah. You might as well scratch Google Pay coupons or something. Right? More money. But even for Google, it's slightly backwards, right? Where content owners have to pay Google to appear higher in search rankings, and now you're actually going and paying someone who owns the content to feature their content. So
yeah, I think you're just paying someone to basically make sure that the content can continue to appear. It's a very strange relationship. And I think the best way how it was described to me, and I read this somewhere, and I wrote a little bit about this, was about what is fundamentally happening at the very core fundamental level. If you look at this entire thing and say, what is really happening? It is that you are actually applying a tax to a link. I mean, that is the fundamental thing that's happening. The basic premise of the internet, and this is also what Tim Berners-Lee went and he spoke, I think, in front of this thing in Australia or in England or something. I don't remember. And of course, people were like, who are you? What do you know about this? And he's like, hello, I invented this. Okay. And he basically said that, a very fundamental thing about the internet is that links are free. In the sense that I have a blog or I have a website and I put a link and that link goes to somewhere else. There is no transaction involved between the person putting the link and person receiving the link. And now what is happening is you are now taxing links. It's like a very core physics part of the internet where you're sort of twisting in a different way.
Yeah.
And it has deep implications. And we don't know what those implications are.
Yeah, the chain is only as strong as the weakest link. Sorry.
Well played.
Great. Wonderful.
Yeah. So then what happened? People can still share or no?
Right. So what ended up happening was that for a while they couldn't, and everybody lost their minds. And then what ended up happening was people started posting stuff, screenshots and saying what happened. And Facebook was like, well, I told you I'd do this. And then there was this great graph I saw somewhere. I think it was on Twitter or one of my subscribers emailed it to me on the social traffic that's coming from Facebook for all the major news publishers in Australia. And that just plummeted. I mean, it was already going down from 2014. After 2016, when they changed their algorithms, it really started falling for a lot of publishers. But when they obviously shut off link sharing, it just falls off a cliff. And that must have spooked a lot of people. So it's not entirely clear what happened behind the scenes, but the fact remains that a few days after the link sharing was disabled, Facebook re-enabled it for Australia. And it seems like there are some news reports that suggest that there is some kind of an agreement that has been reached between Australia's legislatures and Facebook around the wording of the legislation itself. Remember, the legislation is not just law yet. It's right now still in the lower house or something, but it'll almost certainly get passed. Although when Facebook did this initially, the immediate response from Australia was all over the place. Essentially what happened is, they called it, these are 3 words that I found a lot. Okay. The one word that I found a lot was bullying. This is a form of bullying. How dare you? Okay. Another word I found a lot was, this is a form of stealing. you are, by shutting off links on Facebook, what you're doing is you're stealing revenue and the traffic that we can get as news publishers. The third word is the big one, because the first two was like, so we should get a third one that is even bigger. And the third word was the big word, the big C word, censorship. This is censorship. How dare you censor us? So yeah. So these were the things that was happening initially. I think the Australian Prime Minister went out and made a statement. I mean, I didn't even understand. Okay, so very strange things. Okay, never mind. Let's not go there. Okay. Okay, let's not go there. Anyway, but the Australian Prime Minister going out and making a statement like this was like quite out there. Anyway, so this happened. And yeah, so then after that, as I was saying, Facebook obviously then re-enabled everything. And I think the understanding is that there was some agreement that the legislation will give them some kind of a leeway where it's not like, okay, you have to pay X and there is a tribunal. Maybe there is like some kind of other mechanisms that make sure that it's a little more fair and some judicious this thing. My personal view is I don't think it's like a big win for Facebook, but it is probably the only way that both parties could have come out of it saving some face.
Okay. But like, what is Facebook's incentive to like turn it on? I mean, Australia, I don't think is their biggest market anyway, right? Like,
Australia is not just their biggest market. Even news is a very small percentage of their market. Right. So in fact, they have gone and put press reports saying that, look, this is just a problem that's not worth having. Only 4% of the links that are shared on Facebook are news links. Yeah. Which actually tells a lot about Facebook. Okay. Because I wonder what is the remaining. I imagine the remaining 96 is probably
cat videos and baby pictures.
Exactly.
Yeah. Which is what people want to see anyway.
Exactly. It's probably not a bad thing after all. But anyway, so I personally think, what is Facebook's incentive? I don't know. I just think Facebook is just basically trying to pick its battles and essentially saying that, okay, we already have a lot of battles fighting in lots of places. That's one. Two, the other thing that started really worrying Facebook was how Australia started to drum this up and started saying that because this is censorship, because it's all of these things, it started to go a little more international. There was this news article that had come out where the Prime Minister of Australia had said that I'm going to make this international. I'm going to find people who think, basically convince other people about what Facebook is doing. And he made a few calls. And one of the people...
But where did he share it?
Twitter is still around. No, okay, unfortunately. No. So I think there was a news article that basically said how the Prime Minister of Australia, I should actually tell his name. I'm not saying...
Scott Morrison.
Yeah. Scott Morrison. Right? Scott Morrison made a call, and one of the people whom he called was the Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi. He called the Prime Minister and he basically told him that I imagine he aired his grievances. It's not clear what the response was. It may have been like, just politely listening. It may have been, this is not a bad idea after all. Yeah. Okay, it may have been any of them. We don't know. But I suspect these things sort of spooked Facebook. I think Facebook
it's a good name-dropping strategy, right?
Absolutely. It's the best name to drop. I think if Scott Morrison had said, I call Joe Biden, Facebook would have been like, okay, that's fine. But you call the Indian Prime Minister, considering Facebook's ambition in India and its presence in India and all of its things it wants to do in India, maybe, who knows? It may have said, you know what, let's not get ahead of ourselves. It's okay. Let's kill it where it is.
Yeah. No, and also at some level, Facebook has probably realized that it has a terrific penchant for doing absolutely stupid things for their own image, like this net neutrality thing. I cannot think of a more imbecile, whoever's done the net, all it got was cow dung on their face. That's it. Even if they had succeeded, they wouldn't have. It is just completely stupid thing. They don't even need it. It's not going to increase their revenue in any meaningful way.
Yeah.
It's just Facebook being evil. That's all. That's what it looks like. Right? So they don't want that to happen here. They don't want to come out looking evil.
Yeah, you're talking about the free basics thing that happened in India. You're right. That was... In my opinion, that was a classic, like a Western American company saying, oh, here is a country that, what can we do for these impoverished countries? Oh, we can do this. I think that's the approach they took, which obviously didn't work. And it was probably a dumb approach. I tend to agree. It was a dumb approach. However, the very, very interesting part about this particular episode and this entire thing that happened with Facebook in Australia is, and I think somebody was tweeting about this. I think it was Benedict Evans, who is also used to be like a commentator. He has his own newsletter. Great this thing. He had this great thing where he said that this episode is actually a great litmus test about whether tech journalists are people of principles or whether they are just out to bash and hate Facebook, no matter whatever Facebook does. And I think I think there is some truth to that. Because in this particular...
We're not talking about episode 199, right?
We are not talking about episode 1. We're talking about
metaphorical episode.
No, this episode, this Facebook
Cool,
wala.
cool.
Okay, but yes. But he basically said that. And I think I do agree because in this particular case, I think it seems like it's very hard to argue that Facebook did something really wrong or evil in this particular instance. It doesn't seem like it. It just seems
they always end up looking like that.
Exactly. So that's true.
They do things which don't benefit them really, and yet end up looking like evil mastermind, the kind that James Bond would sort of court young ladies who to destroy, whatever James Bond does. Yeah.
At some level I agree, but at some level there's a deep, small part of me feels some kind of sympathy as well. And I'll tell you why. Because I have also seen the things that they've tried really hard and failed. So for instance, I don't know if you know this, the CEO of Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, spent an inordinate amount of time, I know you know that, spent an inordinate amount of time, I don't know if he still does it, learning Chinese. Right? Yeah. How to speak Chinese. I imagine he thought at some point that, this is actually going to help me try to convince the people in China to let Facebook into China. I imagine it's part of the equation. But I suspect, a cynical part of me thinks that maybe Mark Zuckerberg in his empire and his evil tower thought, how do I get into China? I will learn their language. Okay, I guess that will work. So there's one part of that.
Pre-Trump, he also had presidential ambitions, right?
Exactly. That's the other thing. He was traveling to 50 states. He was putting these
Rahul
photos.
Gandhi.
Yeah, he had this entire thing going on like that. The thing that I describe it is it was almost like Zuckerberg was running like this Humans of Bombay page across the US. It's like, here is in Alabama, I met this small couple. These people are small business owners. Oh my God, I was touched. Okay, and like next state. And I was like, what are you doing exactly? So yeah, some really, but that takes work and that takes some amount of belief in this. So in some way, I do feel kind of sympathetic. I feel sympathetic about their position in India, especially around WhatsApp and WhatsApp Pay. I feel sympathetic towards them because I feel like it's very clear why WhatsApp Pay didn't take off for such a long time. At least for a lot of people, it seems very clear why.
Why?
Come on, Tony. And also, the other thing is that the one thing where they seem to have put their real stake in the ground and said, we will not, this is where the line is and we will not back down from it, is end-to-end encryption on WhatsApp as well.
Yeah.
Where it seems like they say, look, no matter who you are, no matter what you do, you can do whatever you want. This is something we will not relinquish on. I'm not saying that it's a great principle, but it's at least something that they're trying.
Yeah.
So I do feel
can I ask something completely, unrelated in the sense to this episode, but how do then, WhatsApp chats end up with authorities and stuff like that if it's all end to end? It's leaked by friends or what?
No, my understanding is two things. Okay. Two parts to it. Part one is it's obviously a WhatsApp chat is let's say you and I WhatsApp each other and we WhatsApp each other really horrible, seditious things, Tony, which we don't, by the way, for listeners. I'm sure people are listening. I'm sure people are listening. No, we don't do any of that. But let's say we did. And so what would happen is if one of us gets arrested, the first thing that they do is they take the phone. The police obviously takes the phone and opens up WhatsApp and uses that as a way to, leaks that out there.
Somebody was actually really just brute force. Just take it That's one way to break encryption.
Yeah. That is actually, yes. It's at one level, it is fundamentally brute force. Think about it. It's not more sophisticated than that. Yeah. That's one. The second way, as I understand it, which is a slightly more sophisticated way, is that your WhatsApp chats, if you had backed it up in, say, at least I have an iPhone, so it gets backed up in iCloud. That is possible. Then what happens is, let's say, for instance, somebody, quote unquote, hacks your iCloud. Or if they go to Apple with a court order that says that we want this iCloud thing back and give it to us, maybe they comply. I'm not sure. Possibly that's another way.
And backups are not encrypted.
Backups are not encrypted. And they're very clear about it. WhatsApp, if you go to the backup section, you'll see backups are not encrypted.
Okay, back to where we were. So,
yeah. I don't know if this is the right place to say this, but Tony and I have been the two vanguards on on a lot of places on, I don't know if Naren sir knows this, on Twitter, on Facebook, on a lot of places where, I don't know if, Naren, have you ever wondered whether sometimes secretly Facebook is listening to you?
Oh,
Do you
yes.
know this?
Yeah.
So sometimes people always say this, where they basically like are talking to their friends about something on the phone, or they're chatting with them on WhatsApp, and it comes, and the ad comes on Instagram or on Facebook, and they're like, "Oh my God, I was just talking about having a baby, and here there is a pregnancy test. How could they know? Are they listening to my microphone?" And I think Tony and I are the only two people who basically have to go and explain to people, no, they don't do that.
Yeah.
I was the one guy who got, I'm 100% convinced because of you guys on that. Because it's so easy. I mean, confirmation bias is so strong. It affects the best of us. Yeah.
No, that's where my sympathy for Facebook also falls off, right? Because it's a really simple thing to say that no, we don't do it. Just state it. Like I've even interacted with Facebook as like someone who uses their ad tech, and even their like client servicing managers refuse to say it. I'm like, dude, like we know you don't do it. Just say it. Why would you say it? Like what's the big deal? So, but like interestingly, right? Because I am like PGK said, we had like many a Twitter debate about this with several people over and over again. Like when I drive to work, right, and whatever is on, I mean, we've all experienced this, something called the Bader-Meinhof phenomenon or recency bias or whatever. The greatest one was like I was listening to an episode of No Such Thing as a Fish, and they're talking about something called Putzmeister, which is basically like a concrete mixer or something. And like 100 feet from me, there is a Putzmeister, like for the first time I'm seeing in my life. And I'm like, okay, Facebook has definitely not placed this here. So but confirmation bias and all of this is very real. And Facebook doesn't listen to your microphones, if anyone will believe us. But I've given up that battle long ago.
And the whole thing, the beauty is Facebook doesn't need to, right?
Yeah.
When it's got the kind of information it does about its listeners, its users, they're going to be right about their likes and dislikes and preferences or whatever a big chunk of the time. So this is all statistics and data analysis and artificial intelligence or whatever it is that work.
I mean, there are a lot of misconceptions about ad tech. I think one thing is exactly what you said, which is that it is much harder and inaccurate to try to listen to someone and then try to say, oh, based on this, these are the ads that we can do. When Facebook doesn't need to do that. It just needs to see what nonsense you're clicking every day. That's enough. Okay. I mean, like, why do I need to listen to you? Okay, that is probably more accurate. And that's one. And I think the few other misconceptions that exist in ad tech is that people believe that their personal, quote unquote, personal information is extremely valuable to these companies, and they collect everything. But the thing is, your personal information is surprisingly not that valuable. In fact, the best, if you look at like segments that work really well and all that, it's extremely rare that, you like Kanye West, so hence we are going, that's okay, you like Kanye West, so be it. But you are a male, you are an engineer, you are from here and you live in Bangalore. You are going to buy this. Let me show this to you. So that is more effective than detailed preferences. So but to come to your point, Tony, if you basically want to know why Facebook is not talking about it, here's my hypothesis. My hypothesis is essentially this, that you're right, it's very simple. You might as well just come out and deny and say, look, we don't do this. I think they did it in one press release, but they didn't do much of it. I suspect that because it's a combination of what both of you said, which is A, Facebook is like really spooked and worried, and B, they're really bad at communication and PR. So what probably the lawyers must have said was, listen, if you deny it today, then what you have to do is, at some point in time in the future, if you decide to collect, even like a smidgen, then you have to come out and say, okay, now we have started collecting. Why say anything at all? Just keep quiet only. And then Facebook would be like, that is flawless. Let's do that. That's the reasoning.
Yeah. No, we know Facebook will start doing it if Snapchat starts, and then they copy it. It's safe till that point.
Brilliant.
It's like something not exactly, but this is something that happened in Yes Prime Minister when one of the bureaucrats says, you don't want people talking about it. So BernersLee asks why. So he says, what will happen if people actually start talking about it? He says, what? Eventually they start thinking about it.
I think Yes Prime Minister and Yes Minister is like is something that I have to watch. I've seen like these few clips here and there. I think it's
insane.
Off
Everything
late,
in the
yeah, exactly. Off late, when I'm starting to watch it, I'm like, oh wow, this looks so familiar. I know this. I understand this really well. It hits too close to home. But I guess I should.
Yeah. British comedy is not just complaining about pitches in India. It's actually much more nuanced.
That's not even a comedy. That is a tragedy for them. Like, my God, how dare you?
So have we covered enough ground, PGK, for you to...
Oh, there is one last thing, if I may end on this note, perhaps. So here's the other thing. Now, after looking at all of this, guess who is now emboldened? The people who are emboldened is this association called... I think it's called the IANS. It's the Indian Association for Newspapers. They put out a statement that basically said that we want a greater share of revenue from Google and Facebook. I think the number they put out there is like, we want like 80% of the revenue, 85% of the revenue. It's not entirely clear what revenue, which revenue, what exactly are they looking for. But yeah, the wolves are out for Facebook.
This is what they call Pulp Fiction, right? Like revenue that doesn't exist, we want.
Yeah. I think there is a certain form of Overton window that has happened with Australia. I think that's the only way to describe it, which means that things that looked completely extreme and fringe and things that you thought were like really crazy stuff slowly are starting to become, I guess this is normal now, so let's all try it. I think that is the real big worry for Facebook. And if you're Facebook and Google, that is a real big worry. I don't think they care about giving this money to Australia. It's probably like chump change for them.
I have a hypothetical question. If Australia didn't play cricket, would we care so much about this? And like if India didn't care about it, would Facebook actually like...
but after this entire episode, that is when I suddenly realized, this makes a lot of sense now. When India tours Australia, when the media goes completely crazy over there, these are the guys. Okay, now I get it. All right. So yeah. So
there was one time long ago when the Western media, the American media used to call India the largest unimportant country in the world. That's what they used to call it.
Oh, that's brilliant.
So I think we can call Australia that from the largest unimportant piece of land in the world, right? Who cares?
I was listening to another podcast today, since we're talking about cricket, about what to do now because of the Asian century. Because the Asian century is on us now. Now India is going to like... You watch the show. Where basically like...
Hammers and shit.
Hammers and... So he says, Naresh, that the Asian century is upon us. Now, India is going to be dominant in like cricket for the next 200 years. There's nothing we can do in Australia and England. We dominate for 200 years. These guys are going to dominate for 200 years. What can we do? And then one of the can do is like we can take children and like, break their fingers with like hammers and all. So that then maybe they will do spin bowling in like really strange, unorthodox ways. So yes, people have reached there. They've reached child abuse.
Anyway, on that chest-thumping Indian note, which will hopefully give us some immunity.
BMKJ, guys. BMKJ.
Okay, that was a lovely and very, very illuminating discussion. And I think, it's time to sum it up. Stay safe and stay unlinked and stay simplified.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
I hope you enjoyed that show. If you aren't following us on social media, please do. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Would like to thank the sponsors on the network this week, CED. We really do appreciate your support. We have a new show on the network. It's called The Fighting Goat. And if you love fighting sports, tune in every Wednesday with hosts Arjun and Somesh. They also feature, by the way, on Cyrus Says this week, where the three fitness freaks bonded over their love for TV sports and sports in general. Tune in to This Round Is On Me, where Gauri celebrated her 25th anniversary with Kavita Rajwade, who is my co-founder at the IVM Podcast Network. They give us details about how this show was curated, and they talk about podcasts in general. On The Habit Coach, Ashton highlighted our addiction to screens, how we are glued to either a big laptop screen or a small mobile screen all day. He shared some tips on how to rectify this unhealthy lifestyle. On All Things Policy, Anirudh Kanisetti spoke to Pratik Vagre and Rohan Sheth about the new internet guidelines that were issued by the Government of India recently and their impact on content creators and platforms. On the Filter Coffee podcast, Karthik invited Vivek Ram, who is a celebrated animation artist. They chatted about his stint with animation and starting his own studio called Vanar Sena, bringing to life stories from ancient India and his scriptures with animation as his vehicle. We had Dhanya Rajendran, the editor of the News Minute, on the note with Maruk Inayat. It was a deep dive into the digital newsroom and the upkeep of truth in a fake news pandemic. And with that, we hope to see you again next week.
पेश खिदमत है आपकी शान में हमारे अंजुमन से. Hi, I am Sadaf.
And I'm Arshit. खाने का इतिहास, economics, policy, psychology, सब है मेन्यू पे.
Only on the Naan Curry podcast every Wednesday. सिर्फ IVM podcast ऐप या वेबसाइट पर या फिर जहां से भी आप अपने पॉडकास्ट सुनते हो.